was lying in that hospital bed trying not to move my head too fast because every time I did, the room tilted like I was on a boat in a storm. The nausea came in waves, and the pain behind my eyes felt like someone was driving a nail through my skull with a hammer. I'd been having these episodes for 3 months, each one worse than the last, and this time I couldn't even drive myself to the emergency room. My sister Keisha had to leave work early to bring me in. Before we dive in, I want to ask you something. Where in the world are you listening from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love seeing how far our community reaches. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. Your support truly helps this community grow. Thank you for being here. She'd found me on the bathroom floor that afternoon, hugging the toilet, unable to stand without everything spinning. She didn't ask questions. She just helped me to her car, drove 15 miles over the speed limit, and walked me through the automatic doors with her arm around my waist like I was made of glass. The triage nurse had kind eyes. She was an older black woman with silver streaks in her hair pulled back in a neat bun, and when she looked at me, really looked at me, I felt seen for the first time in weeks. She asked me to rate my pain on a scale of 1 to 10, and I said 8. My voice came out hoarse. I'd been vomiting for 2 hours before Keisha arrived. 8, she repeated, writing it down on her chart. Her pen moved with practiced efficiency. And how long have you been experiencing these symptoms? 3 months, I said, but it's getting worse. This is the worst it's been. She nodded, didn't question it, didn't suggest I might be exaggerating. She just wrote it all down. The duration, the progression, the frequency of episodes. She took my blood pressure twice because the first reading was elevated and she wanted to make sure it wasn't a machine error. She asked if I had a history of migraines. I said no. She asked if there was any family history of neurological conditions. I said I didn't know, that my father's medical history was incomplete because he'd passed when I was young. We're going to get you back to a room as soon as possible, she said. The doctor will want to run some tests. Has anyone called your emergency contact? My husband, Keisha said before I could answer. I texted him. He's on his way. The nurse nodded and handed me a plastic bag in case I needed to vomit again. Room 7 is ready, she told Keisha. Help her back. I'll let the attending know she's here. Room 7 had pale green walls and fluorescent lights that felt like daggers in my eyes. Keisha helped me onto the bed and pulled the thin curtain partway closed to block some of the light from the hallway. She sat in the plastic chair beside the bed and held my hand while we waited. You're going to be okay, she said. But her voice had that tight quality that meant she was scared too. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe through the nausea. The room smelled like antiseptic and something else, something chemical I couldn't place. I could hear the sounds of the ER beyond our curtain, voices calling out codes I didn't understand, the beep of monitors, someone crying in a room nearby, the squeak of shoes on linoleum floors. A younger nurse came in to start an IV. She was Latina, early 20s maybe, with her hair in a high ponytail. Her hands were gentle as she tied the tourniquet around my arm and felt for a vein. Little stick, she warned before inserting the needle. I barely felt it. Everything hurt too much already for one more pain to register. She hung a bag of saline and adjusted the drip. This'll help with the dehydration, she said. The doctor should be in soon. Do you need anything for the nausea right now? Please, I said. She disappeared and came back with a syringe of something she pushed into my IV port. Within minutes, the nausea began to recede enough that I could open my eyes without immediately needing to vomit. It didn't touch the headache, but it was something. My husband Darnell arrived about 20 minutes later. I heard him before I saw him, his voice carrying down the hallway as he talked on his phone about some project deadline. He walked into my room, still mid-conversation, held up one finger to indicate he'd be just a minute, and kept talking while I lay there with my eyes half closed against the fluorescent lights. Keisha's grip on my hand tightened slightly, but she didn't say anything. We both just waited while he wrapped up his call, pacing in the small space at the foot of my bed, his dress shoes making sharp sounds against the tile floor. When he finally hung up, he leaned down and kissed my forehead quickly. His lips were dry, perfunctory. "Hey baby," he said, "what's going on?" Keisha's text wasn't very detailed. I explained again. The headaches that had started 3 months ago, mild at first, easy to dismiss as stress, or not enough sleep or too much screen time. How they'd gotten progressively worse, coming more frequently, lasting longer. The dizziness that had started about 6 weeks in, how the room would suddenly tilt without warning. The nausea. The vision problems, blurriness, double vision sometimes, spots of light that weren't there. The way I'd started having trouble finding words, how I'd be mid-sentence and the right word would just vanish from my brain like it had never existed. Darnell nodded along, but his eyes had that glazed look that meant he was listening to respond, not to understand. I'd seen that look before when I tried to explain things that didn't fit into his framework of how the world worked. "You've been stressed," he said when I finished. "All that overtime you've been working. The Henderson account has been brutal. You probably just need to slow down, take some time off, maybe." I felt something tighten in my chest. "I haven't worked any overtime in 2 months, Darnell. I've barely been able to make it through my regular hours." "Well, you've been busy, though," he said, shifting his weight. "I know you've had a lot on your plate." I'd taken exactly 0 hours of overtime in the past 3 months because I'd barely been able to function well enough to make it through my regular shifts as a financial analyst. I'd stopped volunteering for special projects. I'd turned down 2 opportunities to lead client presentations. I'd been leaving work at 5 o'clock sharp every day and going straight home to lie down in a dark room because the headaches made it impossible to do anything else. But I didn't have the energy to correct him right then. Keisha stood up. "I'm going to find some coffee," she said, though we all knew the ER coffee would be terrible. "You want anything, Nia?" "I'm okay," I said, though I wasn't. She left, and the silence in the room felt heavy. Darnell sat in the chair she'd vacated and pulled out his phone, scrolling through emails with his thumb. The blue light from his screen was too bright in the dimmed room. "Did they say how long before you see a doctor?" he asked, not looking up. "Soon," the nurse said. "They're running labs." Good. He kept scrolling. "I've got a meeting at 8 tomorrow morning, so hopefully this doesn't take all night." I turned my head away from him and stared at the pale green wall. The paint was chipped in one corner near the ceiling. I focused on that imperfection and tried not to cry. Dr. Morrison came in about 15 minutes later. She was a young white woman, maybe early 30s, with her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore navy blue scrubs and had a tablet tucked under one arm. She introduced herself, shook Darnell's hand. Not mine, I noticed, because I was the patient lying in bed with an IV in my arm, and pulled up a rolling stool to sit at my bedside. "So, Ms. Richards," she said, looking at her tablet, "tell me what brought you in tonight." I went through it all again. The 3 months of progressively worsening symptoms. The headaches that had gone from occasional nuisance to daily agony. The dizziness, the nausea, the vision problems, the word-finding difficulties. I tried to be precise, tried to give her the kind of detailed information I'd want if I were trying to solve a problem. Dates when things started, frequency and duration of episodes, what made things better or worse. She listened, nodding occasionally, her fingers moving across the tablet screen as she took notes. When I finished, she asked follow-up questions. Had I hit my head recently? No. Any history of migraines in my family? Not that I knew of. Was I under unusual stress? I paused at that one, glanced at Darnell, then said, "I didn't think so, not more than usual." "The symptoms you're describing could be consistent with several things," Dr. Morrison said, her voice taking on that carefully neutral tone doctors use when they're about to tell you something you won't want to hear. Migraines, tension headaches, stress-related symptoms. Anxiety can manifest in a lot of physical ways. Headaches, dizziness, nausea, difficulty concentrating. "I'm not anxious," I said. The words came out sharper than I intended. "I'm in pain." She nodded, but something shifted in her expression. A slight pulling back, a professional distance sliding into place. I understand you're in pain. I'm not suggesting you're not. But chronic pain and stress often feed into each other. Your blood pressure is elevated, which could be from the pain, or it could be contributing to the headaches. We'll run some tests to rule out anything serious. But I want to be honest with you. A lot of what you're experiencing can be exacerbated by stress and lack of adequate sleep. I sleep 8 hours a night, I said. My voice came out weaker than I wanted, and I hated that. Hated how being in pain made me sound fragile when I was trying to be clear. Darnell shifted in his chair. She does sleep a lot, he said to Dr. Morrison, like I wasn't right there, like I couldn't speak for myself. And she's been kind of withdrawn lately, not wanting to go out with friends, turning down invitations to things. I've been worried about her mental health, to be honest. I stared at him. The room tilted again, but this time it wasn't from the dizziness. It was from the surreal feeling of hearing my own husband describe my symptoms as personality flaws instead of physical illness. I'd turned down invitations because I could barely stand up without the room spinning. I'd been withdrawn because I was terrified something was seriously wrong with me, and no one seemed to believe me. I'd been sleeping 8 hours because my body was desperately trying to heal from something, and rest was all I knew to give it. I'm not depressed, I said, looking at Dr. Morrison, willing her to understand. Something is physically wrong with me. I can feel it. She nodded again, but I could see it in her eyes. She'd already made up her mind. She'd heard what Darnell said, and it had confirmed whatever she'd been thinking when I walked in. Another woman in her early 30s with vague symptoms and an insistent manner, probably just stressed, probably just anxious, probably just needs to relax and take better care of herself. We'll do a CT scan and run a full metabolic panel, Dr. Morrison said, standing up. That'll help us rule out anything acute, bleeding, masses, major structural issues. But I think we should also consider that this might be your body's way of telling you that you need to address some underlying anxiety or stress. Sometimes our bodies manifest psychological distress as physical symptoms. What about an MRI? I asked. A CT scan wouldn't show everything, would it? What about smaller lesions or inflammation or... An MRI is expensive and probably not necessary at this point, Dr. Morrison said, cutting me off gently but firmly. We want to take a measured approach. If the CT and labs don't show anything concerning, and if the symptoms persist despite conservative treatment, we can revisit more advanced imaging. But let's start with the basics. She left before I could argue. The curtain swished closed behind her, and I was alone again with Darnell and the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. See? Darnell said. She's being thorough. They'll figure out what's going on. But I'd heard what she didn't say. She thought I was anxious. She thought I was stressed. She thought I was exaggerating or misinterpreting normal bodily sensations, or somehow creating symptoms through the power of worry, and my own husband had helped convince her of that. They wheeled me down for the CT scan about an hour later. The tech was kind but efficient, positioning my head in the machine, telling me to hold still, warning me about the contrast dye they'd inject that would make me feel warm and strange. The machine whirred and clicked around me, and I lay there perfectly still, praying they'd find something, anything, some concrete explanation that would make everyone believe me. When they wheeled me back to the room, Darnell was still there, but he'd moved to the chair in the corner and was working on his laptop. He glanced up when I came in, asked if I was okay, then went back to typing before I could fully answer. Keisha had come back. She was sitting in the chair by the bed, and she stood up to help me get settled again. Her hand was warm on my arm, steadying me. "How'd it go?" she asked. "Fine," I said. "Now we wait." The waiting was its own special kind of torture. Time moved differently in the ER, simultaneously too fast and too slow. Minutes felt like hours, but when I looked at the clock, barely any time had passed. The young nurse came back to check my vitals. My blood pressure was still elevated. She made a note on her tablet and left without comment. Dr. Morrison returned about 45 minutes later. She had papers in her hand, and that expression doctors wear when they're about to deliver news. You won't like, but they need you to be grateful for anyway. The CT looks clear, she said, pulling up the stool again. No signs of bleeding, no obvious masses, no acute structural abnormalities. Your blood work shows slightly elevated white blood cells, but nothing alarming. Liver and kidney function are normal. Electrolytes are a bit off, probably from the vomiting, but nothing that concerns me. I felt my stomach drop. Clear. Normal. Nothing concerning. Which meant she still thought I was making this up, or at least making it bigger than it was. So, what's causing the symptoms? I asked. Based on what I'm seeing and what you've described, I think what you're experiencing is likely vestibular migraines combined with stress-related symptoms. Vestibular migraines can cause dizziness, nausea, and headaches. They're often triggered or worsened by stress, lack of sleep, hormonal changes, dietary factors. But what about the word-finding problems? I asked. The vision issues, those don't seem like migraine symptoms. Actually, migraines can affect cognition temporarily. Brain fog, difficulty finding words, trouble concentrating, all of that can be part of a migraine complex. And stress and anxiety can absolutely affect your vision, cause blurriness, or make you more aware of normal visual phenomena. She was explaining it all so reasonably, so logically, making it sound like I'd simply misunderstood my own body, failed to recognize normal stress responses for what they were. What about an MRI? I asked again, just to be sure. An MRI is expensive and probably not necessary at this point, she repeated. What I'd like you to do is try some lifestyle modifications first. Stress reduction techniques, yoga, meditation, regular exercise, better sleep hygiene. I'm going to prescribe you something for the migraines and something mild for anxiety. Let's see how you do on that regimen for a few weeks, and if the symptoms persist or worsen, we can revisit additional testing. I don't have anxiety, I said, but my voice was weak. I could hear how I sounded, insistent, almost desperate, exactly like someone who was anxious would sound. The irony wasn't lost on me. Darnell stood up from his corner. Baby, just listen to the doctor. She's trying to help you. Dr. Morrison handed him a clipboard with several forms. I need signatures here, here, and here, she said, pointing. Treatment plan acknowledgement, prescription authorization, and discharge instructions. I reached for the clipboard, but Darnell had already taken it. He was signing before I could even read what was on the forms, his pen moving quickly across the pages. Darnell, I should read those, I said. I got it, he said, not looking up. You're tired. Just rest. But those are my medical forms. I need to... It's fine, he said, still not looking at me. It's just standard stuff. Treatment plan, discharge, prescriptions. Same as always. But it wasn't the same as always because I'd never been dismissed like this before. I'd never had my own husband sign my medical forms without even asking me if I agreed with what was on them, without checking to see if I had questions, without treating me like an adult capable of making my own medical decisions. I'd never had a doctor look at me like my pain was somehow less real because it couldn't be seen on a scan, because it didn't fit neatly into the boxes she'd been trained to check. I watched Darnell sign his name 3 times, watched Dr. Morrison take the clipboard back and tear off the yellow copy for our records, watched her smile that professional smile and tell us to follow up with my primary care physician within a week. And try to relax, she added, looking at me. Stress is a powerful thing. Sometimes we don't realize how much it's affecting us until we step back and give ourselves permission to slow down. She left. Darnell folded the discharge papers and tucked them in his jacket pocket. Keisha stood by the bed, her jaw tight, but she didn't say anything. She'd been in the hallway during most of the doctor's visit, but she'd heard enough. The young nurse who'd started my IV came back to remove it. She worked quietly, efficiently, pressing gauze over the insertion site and taping it down. But when she leaned close to check my arm, she said softly, just loud enough for me to hear. If you feel like something's really wrong, you trust your gut. You know your body better than anyone. I felt my throat tighten. I nodded because I didn't trust my voice not to crack. She disposed of the IV supplies and gave my arm one gentle squeeze before she left. That small kindness almost undid me. Darnell drove me home. Keisha had offered to take me, but Darnell said he had it handled. He was my husband. He should be the one to drive me. So Keisha hugged me carefully in the parking lot and made me promise to call her in the morning. And then I was alone in the car with Darnell. He talked the whole drive about how glad he was they didn't find anything serious, about how I needed to take better care of myself, maybe take some vacation time, maybe see a therapist, about how his cousin Trina swore by this meditation app, how his co-worker's wife had similar symptoms and they turned out to be anxiety attacks, how stress could really do a number on your body if you didn't manage it properly. I sat in the passenger seat with my eyes closed, trying to keep the nausea at bay even with the anti-nausea medication still in my system, and didn't respond. The motion of the car made everything worse. Every turn, every stop, every slight bump in the road sent waves of dizziness through me. When we got home, I went straight to bed. Didn't brush my teeth, didn't change clothes, just kicked off my shoes and crawled under the covers in our dark bedroom. Darnell stayed up, went to his office to finish his work. I could hear the muted sounds of his keyboard through the wall, the occasional phone call, his voice discussing deliverables and timelines, and things that mattered to him more than I did. I lay there in the dark and cried silently into my pillow, trying not to make any sound, trying not to need anything from anyone, trying not to exist too loudly. The next morning, I woke up with the headache still there, duller but persistent, like a baseline hum I couldn't escape. Darnell was already gone. He'd left a note on the kitchen counter saying he had an early meeting, but he'd put my prescriptions on the counter and left me some oatmeal in the fridge. I looked at the prescription bottles, one for sumatriptan, for the migraines, one for lorazepam, for the anxiety I didn't have. I opened the sumatriptan and took one pill with water. I left the lorazepam untouched. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of pain and doubt. I went back to work because I didn't know what else to do. I sat at my desk and stared at spreadsheets and tried to focus on numbers that kept swimming in front of my eyes. My coworker Tamara asked if I was okay. Said I looked tired. I told her I was fine, just dealing with some headaches. She recommended a chiropractor. The migraines got worse. The medication Dr. Morrison prescribed didn't touch them. I took the pills as directed, felt the slight relief for maybe an hour or two, then the pain came roaring back. The dizziness continued. Twice I had to excuse myself from meetings because the room was spinning too badly for me to focus. Once I had to pull over while driving because I couldn't tell which lane I was in. I started the lorazepam after a week because Darnell found the full bottle and asked why I wasn't taking it. I explained that I didn't have anxiety, that I didn't need it. He looked at me with that expression of patient frustration and said, "Baby, the doctor prescribed it for a reason. You're not a medical professional. You need to trust the experts." So I took it to make him stop talking. The medication made me feel like I was moving through fog. Everything became muffled and distant and slow. My thoughts felt wrapped in cotton. I went to work, did my tasks on autopilot, came home, made dinner, watched Darnell watch television, went to bed. Repeat. I stopped telling him when the headaches were bad because he'd just suggest I take my medication, or maybe I needed to drink more water, or maybe I was grinding my teeth at night and should look into a mouthguard. I stopped mentioning the dizziness because he'd already decided it was vestibular migraines and stress. So what else was there to say? I stopped talking much at all. My mother called one Sunday afternoon. She wanted to know how I was doing, said she hadn't heard from me in a while. I told her I was fine, just busy with work. She asked if something was wrong. I said no, everything was good. She didn't believe me, mothers never do, but she let it go. Said to call her if I needed anything. I promised I would and knew I wouldn't. Because what would I even say? That I felt like I was disappearing inside my own life. That I couldn't tell anymore if the doctors were right and I was just stressed and anxious, or if my body was trying to tell me something was genuinely wrong and no one would listen. That my own husband treated me like I was being dramatic when I tried to explain how scared I was. I started having moments of doubt, lying in bed at 3 a.m. with the room spinning, wondering if maybe they were all right. Maybe it was just stress. Maybe I was making it worse by focusing on it. Maybe if I just relaxed and trusted the medications and stopped being so insistent that something was wrong, the symptoms would fade on their own. But then I'd try to stand up and have to grab the wall for balance, or I'd be talking to a client and lose the word analysis mid-sentence and have to awkwardly talk around it, and I'd know. Deep in my bones, I'd know this wasn't normal. This wasn't stress. This wasn't anxiety. This was something else. 3 weeks after that ER visit, I was in the break room at work trying to make coffee. My hands were shaking. They'd started doing that about a week earlier, and I'd already dropped the coffee scoop twice. Tamara walked in and asked if I needed help. I said I was fine, I just hadn't had my coffee yet, and we both laughed at the irony of needing coffee to make coffee. But when I bent down to pick up the scoop, I dropped again. The room tilted violently. Not the gradual spinning I'd gotten used to, but a sudden complete loss of orientation. The floor wasn't where I thought it was. The walls weren't where they should be. My legs stopped working. I didn't lose consciousness. I was aware of everything. Tamara shouting my name, the cold tile against my cheek, the fluorescent lights too bright above me, the sound of someone running. I just couldn't make my body respond. Couldn't make my legs work. Couldn't make my arms push me up. Couldn't make my mouth form words to tell everyone I was still in here, still aware, still terrified. Tamara knelt beside me. Her face appeared in my field of vision, and she was scared. I could see it in her eyes. "Nia, can you hear me?" she said. "Can you talk to me?" I tried. My mouth moved, but no sound came out. "Call 911, she said to someone behind her. Then to me, her hand warm on my shoulder. "It's okay. You're okay. Help is coming. Just breathe. Just stay with me." I focused on breathing. In and out, in and out. The break room smelled like burned coffee and the sandwich someone had microwaved earlier. The sounds around me were too loud, voices overlapping, footsteps running, someone giving directions to the 911 operator. Another colleague, James from accounting, appeared with a pillow. They slid it under my head. Someone else brought a blanket and draped it over me. I felt absurdly cared for and absolutely terrified at the same time. The paramedics arrived, 2 men in Navy uniforms with equipment bags and a stretcher. They asked questions I couldn't answer. "What's your name? Where does it hurt? Can you move your fingers? Can you move your toes?" Tamara answered for me, giving them my information, my emergency contacts, describing what she'd seen. They checked my vitals, blood pressure high, pulse rapid, pupils unequal, one more dilated than the other. They spoke to each other in that coded language paramedics use, efficient and calm, and I heard enough to know they were worried. They loaded me onto the stretcher. The ceiling tiles passed overhead as they wheeled me through the office. I saw my coworkers' faces, all of them concerned, some of them frightened. My boss, Patricia, said she'd call Darnell. Someone else said they'd get my purse from my desk. The ambulance ride was a blur of motion and sound, siren wailing, radio crackling with dispatcher communications, the paramedics working around me, starting another IV, checking monitors, calling ahead to the hospital. One of them, younger, maybe mid-20s, held my hand and kept telling me I was doing great, just hang in there, we're almost there. We pulled up to a different hospital than the one I'd gone to 3 weeks ago. The emergency entrance had a wide-covered driveway. They wheeled me in through automatic doors, and suddenly there were more people, more voices, more hands touching me and moving me and asking questions. A doctor appeared, older black man with gray hair and steady hands. He shone a light in my eyes, asked me to squeeze his fingers, asked if I could tell him my name. This time my voice worked, came out shaky but audible. "Nia," I said. "Nia Richards." "Good," he said. "Nia." "I'm Dr. Patterson. You're at Methodist Hospital. You had an episode at work. Can you tell me what happened?" I tried to explain the dizziness, the loss of motor control, the 3 months of symptoms before this. He listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, his expression serious but not dismissive. "We're going to run some tests," he said. "CT scan, MRI, full neurological workup. Has anyone contacted your family?" "My job was calling my husband," I said. "Good. We'll keep you comfortable while we figure out what's going on. You did the right thing coming in." But I hadn't come in. I'd been carried in. I'd collapsed at work because my body had finally given up trying to tell me quietly that something was wrong and had started screaming instead. They wheeled me to imaging. Different techs this time, different machines, same instructions to hold still. The CT scan first, then the MRI. The MRI was longer, louder, the machine clanking and humming around me while I lay perfectly still inside a tube, trying not to panic, trying not to think about what they might find, or worse, what they might not find. Darnell arrived while I was still in the MRI. I didn't know until later, but apparently he'd rushed from his office, left his meeting mid-presentation, drove faster than he should have. Patricia from my work said he looked shaken when he arrived, asking questions at the information desk, demanding to see me immediately. When they wheeled me out of imaging and back to a room in the ER, he was there waiting. He stood up as soon as he saw me, came to the side of the gurney, took my hand. His palm was sweaty. "Jesus, Nia," he said. "Are you okay?" "What happened? Patricia said you collapsed." "I don't know," I said. "I was making coffee and everything just stopped working." His face was pale. "The doctor here said they're running tests. MRI, CT, neurological exam. They're being really thorough." I nodded. Thorough. That was good. That was what I'd wanted 3 weeks ago. They settled me in a room to wait for results. Darnell sat beside the bed, still holding my hand. For the first time in months, he wasn't on his phone. He wasn't working. He was just there, present, scared. "I should have listened to you," he said quietly. "At the other hospital, when you said something was really wrong, I should have pushed them to do more tests." I didn't say anything. What was there to say? He should have. He didn't. And now, we were here. Dr. Patterson came in about an hour later. He had a tablet in his hand and that expression doctors get when they're about to deliver news that changes everything. "Ms. Richards," he said, pulling up a chair, "we found something on the MRI." My heart stopped. Darnell's hand tightened around mine. "There's a mass at the base of your skull," Dr. Patterson continued, "about 3 centimeters pressing on your brainstem and cerebellum. It's causing the symptoms you've been experiencing, the headaches, the dizziness, the balance issues, the cognitive difficulties, everything you've been describing for the past 3 months. "A mass," I repeated. My voice sounded strange in my own ears. "Like a tumor?" "Yes. We can't determine if it's benign or malignant without a biopsy, but based on the imaging and the pattern of growth, my educated guess is that it's a meningioma, which is typically benign, but regardless of whether it's cancerous, its location is problematic. It needs to be removed." The room felt like it was tilting again, but this time it wasn't from the tumor. It was from the weight of validation and terror hitting me simultaneously. I'd been right. Something was wrong. All those weeks of being dismissed, of being told I was stressed or anxious, of being made to feel like I was exaggerating, and there had been a tumor growing in my skull the entire time. "How soon?" Darnell asked. His voice cracked. "How soon does it need to be removed?" "We'll need to consult with neurosurgery, but given the size and location, I'd say within the next week or 2 at most. The longer we wait, the more it grows, and the more pressure it puts on critical structures. You're already experiencing significant symptoms. We don't want to risk further neurological damage." "Brain surgery. Within the next week or 2. I was trying to process it, but my mind kept snagging on one thing. The other doctor had been wrong. Dr. Morrison at the other ER had looked at my symptoms and decided they were stress and anxiety without bothering to order the one test that would have found this. "I want to admit you tonight," Dr. Patterson said. "Run some more tests, consult with neurosurgery, get a treatment plan in place. Is that okay with you?" I nodded. What else could I do? They moved me to a room upstairs. Darnell stayed with me, called my mother, called Keisha, started making the phone calls to his work, to my work, arranging for time off, for coverage, for all the logistics that came with a medical emergency. I lay in the hospital bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about that nurse at the first ER who'd told me to trust my gut, about how I'd tried to trust it, but everyone else had trusted the CT scan and the blood work and the assumption that a Black woman in pain was probably just anxious instead. The neurosurgeon came by that evening, Dr. Sarah Chen, a small Asian woman with sharp eyes and gentle hands. She explained the surgery in detail, how they'd go in through the back of my skull, remove as much of the tumor as safely possible, try to preserve as much function as possible. She talked about risks, infection, bleeding, stroke, damage to the brainstem, loss of motor function, loss of cognitive function, death. "What are the odds?" I asked. 70% chance of full symptom resolution with no permanent deficits, she said. 20% chance of some lingering issues, balance problems, fine motor difficulties, occasional headaches, 10% chance of significant complications, and there's always about a 5% chance of death with any surgery involving the brain. So, 95% chance I survive the surgery itself, I said. Yes. I looked at Darnell. He looked terrified. I felt strangely calm. "Okay," I said. "Let's do it." The surgery was scheduled for 5 days later. They wanted to do some more imaging first, get a surgical plan in place, make sure I was stable enough for the procedure. Those 5 days were some of the longest of my life. My mother arrived the next day. She walked into my hospital room with her overnight bag and her church Bible and hugged me so hard I could barely breathe. "My baby," she kept saying. "My baby girl." Keisha came every evening after work. She brought me magazines and snacks and sat with me while Darnell went home to shower and sleep. She didn't ask if I was scared. She just held my hand and told me about her day, about her kids, about the drama at her job, giving me something to focus on besides the surgery looming ahead. Friends from work sent flowers and cards. Patricia, my boss, sent a beautiful arrangement with a note saying my job would be waiting for me whenever I was ready. Tamara visited with a stuffed animal, a small purple octopus with a tag that said, "Get well soon" in glittery letters. She cried when she hugged me, said she'd been so scared when I collapsed that she'd never seen anything like that before. The nurse from the first ER, the one who told me to trust my gut, somehow heard through the medical community network that I was at Methodist awaiting brain surgery. She came by on her break. She didn't work at this hospital, but she'd taken her lunch hour to drive over and visit. She sat beside my bed and took my hand. "I heard what happened," she said. "I'm so sorry we didn't catch it sooner." "You tried," I said. "I saw your notes in my records. You documented everything." "I should have pushed harder, should have advocated for the MRI." "It's not your fault," I said, and I meant it. She'd done what she could within a system that was already predisposed not to believe Black women in pain. We talked for 20 minutes. She told me about her daughter who was starting college, about how she'd gotten into nursing because her own mother had been dismissed by doctors until her cancer was stage 4. "That's why I believe people," she said. "That's why I document everything they tell me, even when I know the doctor might not take it seriously." When she left, she squeezed my hand. "You're strong," she said. "You're going to get through this." I wanted to believe her. The morning of surgery came too fast and too slow. I hadn't been allowed to eat or drink anything since midnight. Darnell had spent the night in the chair beside my bed, neither of us really sleeping. My mother had gone to the waiting room around 5 a.m. to claim seats for her and Keisha, and my Aunt Gloria, who'd driven up from Richmond overnight. The surgical team came at 6:30. Anesthesiologist, nurses, residents. They went over everything again. Risks, benefits, process. They had me sign more forms. This time, I read every word before signing. Darnell didn't try to sign for me. They gave me a sedative while we waited for the OR to be ready. The world started to get soft and distant. Darnell kissed my forehead. "I love you," he said. "I'm so sorry for not listening. I love you so much." I wanted to say something back, something meaningful. Instead, I just nodded. The words felt too heavy to lift. They wheeled me down at 7:15. The OR was blindingly bright and cold, so cold. Someone tucked warm blankets around me. The anesthesiologist appeared above me, explaining what would happen, telling me to count backward from 10. I made it to 7. When I woke up, I couldn't feel the right side of my face. That was the first thing I noticed. The right side of my face was completely numb, like it belonged to someone else. I tried to touch it, but my hand was too heavy to lift. "Nia!" Someone was saying my name. A nurse leaned over me. "Nia, the surgery is over. You're in recovery. Can you hear me?" I tried to say yes. My mouth didn't work right. The sound came out garbled. "That's okay," the nurse said. "That's normal. The numbness should improve over the next few weeks. You did great. Dr. Chen said everything went well." I drifted in and out. Voices around me. Monitors beeping. Something about blood pressure and pain levels and neuro checks. Time felt strange, elastic, meaningless. At some point, they moved me to the ICU. Darnell was there, and my mother. I could see them through the fog of pain medication and post-surgical haze. They were both crying. I wanted to tell them I was okay, but my mouth still wasn't working properly. The next 4 days were a blur of pain and medication, and medical staff checking my neurological function every few hours. Could I squeeze their hand? Could I push against resistance? Could I smile? Could I stick out my tongue? I failed at all of it initially. The right side of my body wasn't responding the way it should. Dr. Chen came by twice a day. She seemed pleased with my progress, even though to me it felt like I was broken in new and terrifying ways. She explained that the numbness and weakness were from the surgery itself, from manipulating the brain tissue and relieving the pressure. Most of it should resolve. Most, not all. Physical therapy started while I was still in the ICU. A cheerful therapist named Marcus, who had me do simple exercises, lifting my arm, turning my head, trying to maintain my balance while sitting. Everything was exhaustingly difficult. When they finally moved me to a regular floor, I'd been in the hospital for a week. I could talk again, though the right side of my mouth still drooped slightly. I could move my arm and leg, though they were weak and uncoordinated. I could sit up without help, though standing was still shaky. Darnell visited every evening after work. He'd stay for a few hours, helping me with dinner, watching TV with me, telling me about his day. He was trying so hard to be supportive, to be present. But there was something in me that had gone cold toward him, something that couldn't quite forget how we'd ended up here. My mother stayed with me during the days. She helped me walk to the bathroom, brush my hair, read to me when I was too tired to watch TV. She didn't say much about Darnell, but I could see it in her eyes when he'd leave for the night. She'd noticed the distance between us. She was just waiting for me to be ready to talk about it. Physical therapy became the focus of my days. 3 sessions daily, each one pushing me a little further. Learning to walk without holding on to things. Learning to reach for objects without overshooting. Learning to eat without spilling. All the things I'd taken for granted my entire life, I had to relearn piece by piece. The occupational therapist, a woman named Lisa, worked with me on fine motor skills, buttoning shirts, writing my name, using utensils. She was endlessly patient, encouraging me when I got frustrated, celebrating tiny victories like successfully tying my own shoes. 2 weeks after surgery, they started talking about discharge. I could walk independently with just occasional balance issues. I could dress myself, feed myself, manage my own hygiene. I was still weak, Still had some facial drooping, still tired easily, but I was functional enough to continue recovery at home. The discharge planning nurse went over everything with me and Darnell. Restrictions: no driving for at least 8 weeks, no returning to work for a minimum of 12 weeks, pending neurological clearance, no strenuous activity, no lifting more than 10 pounds, no vigorous exercise, no bending or straining, follow-up appointments every 2 weeks with Dr. Chen, physical therapy 3 times a week, occupational therapy twice a week. The list went on and on. Medications to prevent seizures, pain medication for headaches, stool softeners because the pain medication caused constipation, instructions for wound care for the incision at the base of my skull. Darnell took notes on everything, nodding seriously, asking questions about timing and dosages and what to watch for. He'd arranged to take a week off work to help me get settled at home. We left the hospital on a Thursday afternoon. Darnell wheeled me out in a wheelchair even though I could walk because hospital policy required it. My mother had already gone ahead to the house to set up my bedroom to make sure everything was within easy reach so I wouldn't have to strain. The drive home felt surreal. I sat in the passenger seat staring out the window at a world I'd been removed from for 3 weeks. Everything looked the same. Same streets, same buildings, same trees, but I felt fundamentally different. Like I'd left one version of myself in that hospital and was returning as someone new, someone who'd had her skull opened and a piece of her brain removed and survived. Home looked exactly as I'd left it. Darnell helped me inside, his hand hovering near my elbow like I might fall at any moment. My mother had transformed the bedroom into something resembling a recovery suite. Extra pillows stacked on the bed, a small table beside it with water bottles and my medications organized in a daily pill organizer, a bell I could ring if I needed help, fresh flowers on the dresser. I started crying when I saw the flowers. I didn't even know why, just the kindness of it, the care. The evidence that someone had thought about what might make this easier. "Oh, honey," my mother said, wrapping me in her arms. "You're home now. You're going to be okay." I let her hold me while I cried. Darnell stood awkwardly in the doorway, not sure what to do. The first week home was harder than I expected. Everything exhausted me. Taking a shower required a nap afterward. Walking to the kitchen for a snack meant needing to lie down for an hour. My brain felt foggy and slow, like I was thinking through water. Darnell took care of everything he could. He cooked simple meals, helped me with my medications, drove me to my therapy appointments. He worked from home, setting up his laptop at the kitchen table so he'd be nearby if I needed anything. He was trying. I could see him trying. But every time he helped me button my shirt or cut my food or reminded me to take my pills, I remembered him signing my discharge papers without asking me. I remembered him telling Dr. Morrison I was just stressed. I remembered 3 months of him not believing me, and I couldn't forget. My mother stayed another week, then had to get back to her own life. Before she left, she sat with me on the bed, holding my hands. "You've been through something traumatic," she said carefully. "The surgery, yes, but also everything leading up to it. All those weeks of not being believed. That's trauma too, baby. You know that, right?" I nodded. "And I'm not going to tell you what to do about Darnell," she continued. "That's your decision. But I want you to know that whatever you decide, I support you. If you need to leave, you can come stay with me. If you need space, I'll help you figure that out. If you want to try to work it out, I'll support that too. But don't stay because you think you owe him something or because you feel guilty for being sick." "I don't know what I want yet," I said. "That's okay. You don't have to know right now. Just promise me you'll think about what you need, not what everyone else needs from you." I promised. After she left, it was just me and Darnell in the house. He went back to work after that first week, regular hours at the office. I was alone during the days, navigating recovery by myself. Physical therapy 3 times a week became my anchor. The clinic was bright and encouraging, full of people recovering from strokes and accidents and surgeries. My therapist, a woman named Aisha, pushed me just hard enough to make progress without overwhelming me. We worked on balance exercises, strength training, coordination drills. Slowly, incrementally, I got stronger. Occupational therapy focused on the fine motor skills I'd lost. My handwriting was still shaky, my coordination still imperfect. Lisa had me doing exercises with therapy putty, stacking blocks, manipulating small objects. It felt childish sometimes, but it worked. Each week, I could do a little more. The medical bills started arriving about a month after surgery. Even with insurance, they were catastrophic. The surgery alone was $40,000 out of pocket. The hospital stay was another $25,000. The ER visits, the imaging, the therapy sessions, they stacked up like an avalanche of debt. I organized them in a folder on the kitchen counter, trying not to panic. I'd always been the one who managed our finances. I was the financial analyst. This was supposed to be my area of expertise. But staring at numbers that totaled more than our annual income, I felt helpless. Darnell didn't want to talk about them. Every time I brought it up, he'd say we'd figure it out. We'd set up payment plans. Don't stress about it. Like stress was something I could control. Like worry was a choice I was making instead of a reasonable response to financial catastrophe. But I couldn't just not think about it. So I started making calls to the hospital billing department, negotiating reduced rates for cash payment, to our insurance company appealing denied claims, to financial assistance programs, filling out endless applications for aid. I spent hours on hold, hours explaining our situation, hours being transferred from department to department. I set up payment plans for what couldn't be reduced or written off. $300 a month to the hospital, $200 to the neurosurgeon's office, $150 to the imaging center, smaller amounts to various labs and specialists and therapy clinics. I created a spreadsheet tracking it all, watching our savings account drain month by month. And I started making other changes too, quietly, carefully. I opened a checking account in just my name, redirected my direct deposit when I eventually went back to work, started building my own savings separate from our joint accounts, just in case. I called a lawyer about updating my medical power of attorney. The lawyer was a Black woman about my age named Simone, who'd been recommended by a friend from church. She listened to my story without judgment and helped me fill out the paperwork to revoke Darnell's medical decision-making authority and transfer it to my mother. "You're smart to do this," Simone said when we met to sign the final documents. "Medical power of attorney is one of the most important documents you'll ever sign. You need someone who will fight for you when you can't fight for yourself." "I had someone who didn't," I said. "I know, that's why you're here." The hospital had the new paperwork on file within a week. Darnell didn't know. I didn't tell him. It felt like a small rebellion, a quiet reclaiming of control over my own body. 6 months after the surgery, I was cleared to return to work on limited hours. My balance had mostly recovered. The facial drooping had resolved. I still had some lingering weakness in my right hand and occasional headaches, but Dr. Chen said I was doing remarkably well. My boss, Patricia, eased me back in gradually. 20 hours a week for the first month, all simple tasks. Data entry and basic reporting, nothing that required complex analysis or client interaction. It was humbling, doing entry-level work when I'd been managing multi-million-dollar accounts before the surgery. But I was grateful to be back at all. Tamara hugged me on my first day back. "I'm so glad you're okay," she said. "We all are. The office hasn't been the same without you." Slowly, over the next few months, I increased my hours and responsibilities. Patricia was patient, checking in regularly, making sure I wasn't pushing too hard. By month 4, I was back to full-time, back to my regular caseload, mostly back to my old self. Except I wasn't my old self. Not really. I'd changed in ways I was only beginning to understand. Darnell noticed. He'd ask what I was thinking about, and I'd say nothing. He'd suggest we go out to dinner, and I'd say I was too tired. He'd try to initiate sex, and I'd plead headaches or fatigue or just not being ready yet. He was patient about it, gave me space, didn't push. But I could see the confusion in his eyes, the hurt. We existed in the same house like roommates, polite, considerate, distant. It was during this time that Darnell's father had his stroke. Massive, life-threatening. Darnell got the call at 2 a.m, his mother screaming into the phone that his father had collapsed, that the ambulance was coming, that Darnell needed to get to the hospital now. We drove there in silence through empty streets. Darnell was crying, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. I sat beside him and felt sympathy, genuine sympathy for his pain, but I didn't feel the desperate need to fix it that I might have felt before my own medical crisis. His father, Raymond, survived the initial stroke, but was left partially paralyzed on his left side. He couldn't speak clearly, the words coming out slurred and confused. He couldn't walk without assistance. He couldn't do the most basic tasks of daily living without help. He was in the ICU for 2 weeks. Darnell practically lived there, going to work only when absolutely necessary, spending every other moment at his father's bedside. His mother, Carol, was a wreck, crying constantly, unable to process what the doctors were saying, overwhelmed by every decision that needed to be made. Darnell was drowning. I could see it happening. The medical terminology, the insurance authorizations, the rehabilitation options, the discharge planning. It was all too much, coming too fast, requiring knowledge he didn't have and clarity he couldn't manage through his grief and fear. He started calling me from the hospital. Could I explain what the neurologist just said? Could I look up what a PEG tube was? Could I help him understand the difference between acute rehab and skilled nursing? Could I call the insurance company and explain why his father needed an extended hospital stay? I helped with what I could. I looked up medical terms and explained them in plain language. I researched rehabilitation facilities and compared their outcomes data. I created spreadsheets, tracking medications and appointments. I called insurance companies and argued with billing departments, using all the skills I'd learned from my own medical nightmare. But I kept boundaries. When Darnell asked me to come to family meetings with the medical team, I said no. When he asked me to call the neurology team directly to advocate for different treatments, I declined. When he forwarded me legal documents about healthcare proxies and asked me to review them, I sent them back and told him to consult a lawyer. "Why won't you help me?" he asked one night. We were in the kitchen. He'd just come home from the hospital, exhausted and frustrated. "You know how to do all this. You've been through it. You know how to talk to doctors and navigate the system." "I learned how to do all that because I had to," I said quietly, "because no one else was doing it for me." His face flushed. "I was there. I came to all your appointments." "You were there," I agreed, "but you weren't listening. You weren't fighting. You signed papers without reading them. You told doctors I was exaggerating." "I didn't know." "You didn't believe me," I corrected. "There's a difference between not knowing and choosing not to believe." He stared at me across the kitchen counter. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "So, you're punishing me," he said finally, "by refusing to help with my father." "I'm not punishing you, I'm protecting myself. There's a difference." He left the room. I heard him go into his office. Heard the door close with a little more force than necessary. I stood in the kitchen and felt nothing. No guilt, no anger. Just a calm, clear certainty that I was done being expected to save everyone while no one had saved me. Raymond was eventually moved to a long-term acute care facility. He was stable, but nowhere near recovered enough to go home. The facility was nice as those places could be, but it was expensive. Medicare covered some of it, but there were gaps, co-pays, additional costs for occupational and speech therapy. Carol couldn't manage it alone. Darnell's sisters lived out of state, one in Atlanta, one in Seattle. They called daily, offered emotional support, flew in for important meetings, but the day-to-day burden fell on Darnell and Carol. Darnell was drowning deeper, missing work, losing weight, looking hollowed out from stress. His boss was understanding, but there were limits to how much slack they could give him. Clients were complaining, projects were falling behind. He needed help, real help, someone who could be there, ask the right questions, make sure his father's interests were protected in a system that often overlooked older Black patients. He asked me again, not just to make phone calls or research options, but to be officially designated as a secondary decision maker, to have my name on the legal documents alongside his and Carol's, to share the responsibility. We were sitting in the living room when he asked. He'd brought home all the paperwork the social worker had given him: healthcare proxy forms, power of attorney documents, treatment authorization agreements. He'd spread them across the coffee table like evidence. "I know I haven't earned this," he said. His voice was quiet, defeated. "I know I failed you, but I'm asking anyway because I don't know what else to do. I can't do this alone." I looked at the papers, looked at him, looked at my hands in my lap. "You're not alone," I said. "Your mother is there. Your sisters are involved. The social worker said there are patient advocates who can help navigate all this. But I need you," he said. "You're the only one who understands what this is like. You've been through it. You know what questions to ask. You know how to fight for someone." "I learned how to fight for myself because no one else would," I said. "Your father has you. He has your mother. He has a whole family who believes him when he says he's in pain, who doesn't question whether his symptoms are real." Darnell flinched like I'd slapped him. "I can't do this," I continued. "I won't put my name on medical decision documents for anyone. Not for your father. Not even for you." "What do you mean, not even for me?" His voice went tight. "I mean, I've changed my medical power of attorney. My mother has it now. The hospital has the updated paperwork on file." He stared at me. "When did you do that?" 8 months ago." The silence that followed was suffocating. I could see him trying to process it, trying to understand what this meant. "You're leaving me," he said finally. "Not today," I said. "But eventually, yes. Because of one mistake. Because when I needed you to believe me, you made me feel crazy instead. Because when I needed you to listen, you signed papers without asking me what I wanted. Because when I was fighting for my life, you were more worried about whether I was being dramatic than whether I was dying." His eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry. I've apologized so many times. What else can I do?" "Nothing," I said. "That's the point. There's nothing you can do now. Some things can't be fixed by apologies." He looked at the paperwork spread across the table. All those signature lines waiting to be filled. All those decisions waiting to be made. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked. "The same thing I did," I said. "Figure it out." I stood up and walked to the bedroom, closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed and felt nothing but relief. Over the next few weeks, Darnell did figure it out. Carol signed most of the legal documents, with input from Darnell's sisters via video calls. A hospital social worker helped him navigate the insurance maze, advocated for his father, explained options in clear language. A patient advocate attended key meetings and asked the questions Darnell didn't know to ask. Raymond slowly improved. Not back to his old self, that wasn't possible, but to a new baseline where he could communicate basic needs, feed himself with some assistance, participate in his own care. It was progress, imperfect, but real. And Darnell learned. I could see it happening. He started taking notes at doctor meetings. He recorded conversations so he could listen again later when he was less overwhelmed. He researched medical terms and treatment options. He learned what questions to ask and how to advocate, but he did it without me. And we both knew our marriage wouldn't survive it. I filed for divorce on a Tuesday afternoon. I'd thought about it for months, talked it through with my therapist, consulted with Simone about the process. I'd organized all our financial documents, separated our accounts as much as possible, prepared for the logistics of dividing a life. The papers were served to Darnell at his office. He called me that night, his voice shaking. "Can we talk about this?" "There's nothing to talk about," I said. "Please, can we at least try counseling? Can we try to work this out?" "I don't want to work it out, Darnell. I'm done. But I love you." "I know," I said, "but it's not enough." We agreed to mediation to keep things civil, met with a mediator once a week for 6 weeks to divide assets, settle debts, finalize the terms, no-fault divorce, equitable division, no alimony. Neither of us wanted to be tied to the other financially. He got the house. I got my car, my retirement accounts, and the savings I'd been quietly building. We divided the medical debt based on who had incurred it. I took responsibility for my surgical bills. He took responsibility for his father's care costs. The final hearing was on a Thursday morning, 6 months after I filed. We sat in a small courtroom with our lawyers, answered the judge's questions, confirmed we understood the settlement. The judge signed the order, told us we were free to go. Darnell caught up with me in the parking lot. "That's it?" he said. "That's really it?" "That's it." "I still love you," he said. "I know I messed up, but I still love you. Doesn't that matter?" "It matters," I said. "But it's not enough." He stood there next to his car, looking lost. "What am I supposed to do now?" "The same thing I did," I said again. "Figure it out." I got in my car and drove away. In my rearview mirror, I could see him still standing there, and I thought about that night in the emergency room when he'd signed my discharge papers without asking me if I agreed. I thought about how small I'd felt in that hospital bed, how invisible. I wasn't invisible anymore. I moved into a small apartment in a neighborhood I'd always liked, but Darnell had said was too far from his work. I furnished it piece by piece with things that were entirely mine. I painted the bedroom a warm yellow that made me smile every morning. I set up my own space exactly how I wanted it. Life became quiet, peaceful. I went to work, came home, had dinner with friends sometimes, spent Sundays with my mother. Physical therapy had ended months ago, but I kept up with the exercises, maintained my strength, took care of my body with the attention I'd never had before. 3 months after the divorce was final, I got a text from a mutual friend. Darnell's father had taken a turn for the worse. There were decisions to make about escalating care versus comfort measures. The family was at the hospital. They were struggling. Could I maybe come help them understand what the doctors were saying? I thought about it for a long time. Thought about that kind nurse who'd held my hand. Thought about Dr. Chen, who'd taken my symptoms seriously. Thought about how scared I'd been and how much it had meant to have someone fight for me. I also thought about lying in that ER bed while my husband told the doctor I was probably just stressed. Thought about him signing papers without asking me what I wanted. Thought about 3 months of being dismissed and diminished and disbelieved. I texted back, "I'm sorry to hear about Raymond. I hope Darnell finds the support he needs. The hospital has excellent patient advocates available. I wish them all the best." I didn't go. Raymond passed away 2 weeks later. I sent flowers to the funeral home with a sympathy card. I didn't attend the service. About a month later, I ran into Darnell at the grocery store. It was awkward and surreal. Both of us standing in the produce section holding our shopping baskets, making small talk like acquaintances instead of people who'd shared a life. "How are you doing?" I asked. "Getting by," he said. He looked thinner, tired. "You?" "Good. Really good, actually." There was a pause. He shifted his basket from one hand to the other. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for the flowers, for the card." "Of course. Can I ask you something?" He looked at his shoes, then at me. "That last time, when I asked you to come to the hospital, to help with the decisions about my dad, did you ever think about saying yes?" "Yes," I said honestly. "I thought about it." "Why didn't you?" I could have said a lot of things, could have explained again how it felt to be dismissed, to be signed off on like I was a child instead of a partner. Could have reminded him of every time he chose to believe a doctor who'd known me for 15 minutes over a wife who'd been telling him something was wrong for 3 months. But I didn't say any of that. "Because you needed to learn to ask better questions," I said. "And you couldn't do that as long as someone else was there to do it for you." He nodded slowly. "Did I? Learn, I mean." "I don't know," I said. "Did you?" "I think so. I hope so." He paused. I listened more, took notes, recorded conversations, asked the doctors to explain things multiple times until I understood. I learned what questions mattered. He looked at me directly, but it was hard. It was so much harder doing it alone. I know, I said. I'm sorry, he said, for making you do it alone. I know, I said again. We stood there for another moment, two people who used to share a life, now holding grocery items in a produce section with nothing left to say. Take care of yourself, Darnell, I said finally. You too. I walked away and finished my shopping. At the checkout line, a woman behind me complimented the scarf I was wearing, a bright Ankara print I'd bought on a whim. I thanked her, and we ended up chatting about where she could find similar prints. By the time I left the store, I'd exchanged numbers with her for a fabric shop recommendation. Small moments of connection. That's what my life had become. Small, genuine moments with people who saw me as I was. When I got home, I unpacked my groceries and made dinner for one. Salmon with roasted vegetables and rice. I ate on my small balcony watching the sunset, listening to Nina Simone from my phone, feeling perfectly content in my own company. My phone buzzed, a text from my mother. Sunday dinner, your Aunt Gloria is coming. She's bringing her famous peach cobbler. I texted back, I'll be there. Another text appeared. Bring that nice young man from church if you want, the one who asked about you last week. I smiled. My mother had been not so subtly trying to set me up with David, a teacher who volunteered in the children's ministry. He was kind, thoughtful, and had actually listened when I mentioned I was still recovering from surgery without immediately trying to fix things or minimize what I'd been through. Maybe, I texted back. We'll see. She sent back a heart emoji and a winking face. Life was quiet now, peaceful. I'd built something solid and mine, a career I'd returned to stronger, friendships I'd deepened through crisis, a relationship with my family that had grown closer when it mattered most. I'd learned to trust my own voice again, to believe my own experience, to know that my pain was real whether anyone else validated it or not. The tumor was gone. The marriage was over. The version of myself who'd needed permission to exist had been surgically removed along with the mass pressing on my brain. What remained was simpler, clearer, entirely my own. I never spoke to Darnell again after that grocery store encounter. I heard through mutual friends that he'd started dating someone new about a year later. Someone from his office, apparently. I hoped he treated her better than he'd treated me. I hoped he'd learned to listen. But whether he had or hadn't was no longer my concern. I'd learned something more important than how to make him understand. I'd learned that I didn't need him to understand. I didn't need his belief in my pain to make it real. I didn't need his signature on my medical documents to have agency over my own body. I didn't need his permission to protect myself. I'd learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is no. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. Just be unavailable when they finally realize they need you. Just be gone when they come looking for someone to save them the way they never saved you. Just live your life like they were never the center of it at all. Because they weren't. They never were. I took the last bite of my salmon and looked out at the city lights beginning to twinkle as dusk settled. Somewhere in those lights, Darnell was living his own life, navigating his own regrets. Somewhere, Raymond's death was still fresh grief in Carol's heart. Somewhere, people were in emergency rooms right now, scared and in pain, hoping someone would believe them. And somewhere, in this small apartment with yellow walls and Ankara print throw pillows and Nina Simone playing softly, I was whole, not healed. Healing was ongoing. Maybe lifelong, but whole, complete in myself. The version of me who'd lain in that hospital bed unable to advocate for herself was gone. The version who'd signed away her own medical autonomy because it was easier than arguing was gone. The version who'd believed that love meant sacrificing your own needs for someone else's comfort was gone. What remained was a woman who knew her own worth, who could sit with herself in silence and feel peace instead of anxiety, who could say no without guilt, who could walk away from people who diminished her and never look back. I finished my wine and went inside. Tomorrow I'd go to work, have lunch with Tamara, maybe text David about Sunday dinner. Simple things, normal things. Things that felt revolutionary because I was choosing them from a place of genuine desire instead of obligation. I got ready for bed in my own time, in my own way, set my alarm, turned out the lights, climbed between sheets I'd picked out myself in colors I actually liked, and I slept soundly, dreamlessly, in the perfect quiet of a life I'd built entirely on my own terms. The past had taught me everything I needed to know. The future was mine to write. And in the present, in this moment, I was exactly where I needed to be. Alone, yes, but never again invisible. Never again unheard. Never again anything less than absolutely certain of my own reality, my own truth, my own power. That certainty was worth more than any apology, any second chance, any promise of changed behavior. It was worth everything, and I'd never let anyone take it from me again. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And before you go, click on Hype to help this video reach even more people. Your support keeps these voices alive and keeps our community growing. Thank you for listening.